The holidays are all about sharing with family. Meals, couches, stories, Grandma's secret pecan pie recipe. And now you can also share a cart with Instacart Family Carts. Everyone can add what they want to one group cart from wherever they are. So you don't have to go from room to room to find out who wants cranberry sauce, or whether you should get mini marshmallows for the yams, or collecting votes for sugar cookies versus shortbread. Just share a cart, and then share the meals and the moments. Download the Instacart app and get delivery in as fast as 30 minutes. Plus, enjoy free delivery on your first 3 orders. Service fees and terms apply.
And welcome back to Scarred for Life, the podcast where we open up old wounds by looking back at the films that scared us as kids. I'm Terry.
And I'm Mary Beth.
In each episode, our special guest brings with them a movie that traumatized them as a child.
This week, we are very excited because our guest is Chris Vander Kaay. He's a writer and a director whose new film, Ask, is out now on POV Horror. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, guys. I'm glad this isn't on video because everyone would see me sort of ADHD bobbing back and forth because I'm excited to be here. Thank you guys for having me.
Yay!
We're really excited to chat with you. So tell our listeners a little bit about Ask.
And as a quick disclosure, I did produce this movie. Just so everyone knows off the top and no one thinks there's weird lying going on, I am a producer on this film. We're just putting that out there now.
Yes. Which, to be fair, is the only reason anyone knows about it. So thank you for that.
Anyway.
So the quick pitch I've been telling everybody for Ask is I say this is basically the monkey's paw for the influencer generation.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, it's about an influencer, or a wannabe influencer, I guess, who's trying and failing to get a foothold in the motivational industry. And then one day he gets some advice from a shady life coach, and it starts working really well, like alarmingly well, disturbingly well. And all of his dreams start to come true. And then, of course, in true monkey's paw fashion, those wishes that come true have really bad side effects that had not occurred to him. And so his life sort of starts to spiral out of control. And so it's a found footage film about a guy who's trying to build up a following and then the results that come from that really bad following that he gets.
Hell yeah, hell yeah, hell yeah. Terry, I can ask questions, but also I've been really involved in this, so I don't know if you have more questions than I do. But I do, Chris, want you to highlight like the guerrilla filmmaking idea behind this, because this movie was made for like almost literally $0 and 0 cents. And I think that's like one of the coolest things about how you accomplish this.
Yes. If anybody's wondering about the budget, I spent more money entering it into 4 film festivals than I spent on the film itself. So if that gives you a ballpark. So it was about, I think it was probably all told, I spent myself $70 making this movie. But the goal of the movie was twofold. The first one was, I wanted to make something that was inspirational to filmmakers who didn't have resources and didn't have a budget, but still wanted to be creative. I see all the time, everybody's like, oh, you just got to go write your script and then, get it to somebody who knows somebody. And then eventually, in 7 or 8 years, somebody will, and like, nobody has time for that anymore. And especially the way the industry's changing. So it's like, there has to be a way to just make a thing. So that was my first inspiration. And then my second inspiration was a weird one, as for a while, I was homeless, and as a result of that, I had really bad teeth because for a long time, wasn't able to brush my teeth. Anyway, I had really bad teeth. I finally got a good job, got money. I was going to be able to get my front 6 teeth fixed. It was going to be a huge life change. I knew I was going to look completely different. And the producer in me was like, there's something there. I got to figure out how to use that, right?
Not
like
you capitalizing on your own fucking teeth. I love that so much. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Just like, how can I make this a movie?
Yeah. Well, I just thought like I'm premiering the new me, so there's got to be a fun way for me to do like I could shoot something beforehand because that'll be great production value. Like, what other movie with no money would be able to have a guy who has terrible teeth that then get replaced overnight magically? And I'm like, okay, so I just walked backwards from there. I just sort of reverse engineered an entire narrative built around the idea of this guy wakes up one day and he has brand new shiny teeth. Wow. How do I create that? And then so I worked backwards and then I came up with the concept that I did. And almost everything else in the film worked similarly. We stumbled into so many elements because I remained open. I never wrote a script. I wrote a sort of a beat sheet. And then I would just go and make scenes. And as I was places, things happened. Like, for instance, there is an actual person actually getting arrested in the background of one of the scenes because one of the places I was going to shoot, a man was being arrested in the parking lot. So I said, well, that's going to get written into the story now. So 3 minutes to figure out how I did it. And then I shot the scene with them in the background, and then I reverse engineered and wrote that into the movie too. So a ton of this movie was literally just stuff like that. Like me just figuring out, how do I use every piece of the buffalo?
Well, and you've shot this on business trips too. Like, you travel in this movie like you're giving seminars, but it's because
I was gonna ask.
You were traveling for work, right? Like, this is all shot like because you were already traveling for your job?
Correct, yes. This is the most expensive $0 film ever made because it was everything that was done for work. I went to Vegas for a trip. I went to Louisville to train attorneys to do something. In fact, I hope I don't get in trouble for this, but one of the seminars that I went to, there's some footage in the movie that I just shot of myself while I was actually in front of a room full of attorneys giving a seminar. And I was just like, well, it's never going to look more realistic than the moment I was actually doing it. So I just did it.
I was wondering about that because, like, there's a scene early in the movie where, and it might be this one that you're talking about, where you're at this very fancy, like, resort looking type place, and you're like scouring out the conference room, and then you kind of position, at one point the camera is positioned underneath you, and then you use that a little bit later. So I was wondering how much of that was like on the fly type filmmaking, or how much of that was intentional. Like,
that was a 3-day legal marketing event that I went to, and that was the actual room that it was happening in, and I was shot all of that except for the one shot when I was in front of them. Everything else was during lunch break. They were all out eating. I ate fast. I ran back in the room and shot all that footage. And that was basically how most of the movie happened, was I would squeeze a piece of a movie in between my actual assignments. So
when did you start filming this movie then? How long has this taken?
So the shooting of the film, like the actual shooting time, was very little. I never did more than a second take on any scene except for one, which was just because of the orchestration of an edit. I had to shoot a couple of times, but I don't think I shot any scene more than twice otherwise. So the actual shoot time was very little, but it was in chunks for about 3.5 months. Because I knew I had to shoot the entire first half of the movie, or a little less than half, before I got my teeth fixed. Like, so that all had to be done. So I shot everything that I could, and then I think it was in January of 2023 is when I went and got my teeth fixed. And so I knew I had to get all that done, and then I just had to wait. And then I got the new teeth, and then I shot the rest of the movie after that. So that was, I was basically just, and then after that happened, then I had the next event that was going to be in Louisville. And so I would shoot all the other pieces in between that were at my house. I would shoot in between and then just wait for whatever the next big event was that I was going to be at, out of town for something. And then I shot that whole sequence in the airplane and all that kind of stuff just on the road to go to an event or come back from an event. So,
see, guy, look, to all of our listeners out there, if you are a filmmaker, this is like such an inspiring thing, I think, to be like, you can do the movie. Like, I don't know. Like, I think it's so easy to get wrapped up in like, oh, I don't have a crew, I don't have this, I don't have that. But it's like, so get creative and like have fun with it. And even if it's not like the best thing you've ever made, you still made a fucking movie.
100%. Well, and I'm in it and I'm not an actor. So like I did that intentionally, honestly, to be like, listen, you can literally do this with nothing at all. I didn't even have a performer. But honestly, the way that I made it, I couldn't have. Like, I'm not going to pay for an extra guy to fly with me to Vegas because I'm going there for free for something else, So, yeah, for me, it was just like, one of the things I was inspired by was when you watch all of Robert Rodriguez's behind-the-scenes stuff, every single one of his pieces of advice is not really how to, find your vision or get the best shot or whatever. It's like, how do you do this quickly and inexpensively so that you can get it done, it looks nice, and someone will give you money to make the next one. And so I kind of always think...
That's the most important thing. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, you're 100% right.
I was going to go off for like a thing, because like, what is more important is showing a producer or showing a company that you know how to work effectively and cheaply. No matter how much money they have, they want to know that you know how to handle a budget and know how you can make your days. Yeah. You can have vision... But you also might be really fucking bad at directing and being able to make your days, to hit your budget, like to go over budget. And if you can demonstrate that, like, you see Skinamarink and we're all going to the World's Fair doing so well because they're really smart and they were made for like dirt.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I love Richard Linklater as a filmmaker, but the reason he's had a 30-year career is because he has small budgets. He always comes in under those budgets and on time.
Yep.
Every single time. Almost no film he's ever made has lost money. That's insane. An insane track record.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like I think there's 2 or 3, but like they're so inexpensive, But But yeah, so, that's the reason I made it, frankly. And it's also the reason that I wrote a book about it that I'm trying to place with a publisher right now. I think we might have a place, fingers crossed, that just talks through the entire process of here's how I did it. Here are all the scenes. Here's how I made them happen. Here's the easiest way to get from I don't have anything to I've got a very inexpensive movie I need to find a home for.
So wait, you have a movie about a self-help kind of guy, motivational speaker, and in a way, this film is meant to be a motivation. There's like layers.
There's a lot of weird meta layers going on here with what Chris is doing. It's very good.
Yeah, no, 100%. Like the joke of the movie is that a lot of it is about imposter syndrome, which I feel an enormous amount of because I work in a room teaching $1 million attorneys how to do stuff, and you guys have seen my office. I shouldn't be in those rooms with those people.
It's gotta feel like I know the imposter syndrome, but something about that is like, yeah, baby, I know something you don't, and I have a very good skill that you don't have. Ha. I don't know. Something about that feels powerful to me.
Well, I can't lie to you. There was something very powerful about the idea that going to these events that I was sneakily shooting a feature film around all of the other events that are happening. There's definitely a level of power to that. Look around the room and know that, the rest of you guys are taking notes about what you're going to do about your SEO when you get home. I'm making a movie, So there is that.
Also, everyone, Chris is a really good SEO expert and helps me at Dread Central with their YouTube SEO. So Chris wears many hats and is very good.
Thank you.
Sorry.
No, listen, you're the producer.
Out your skills.
I was just going to say, I believe that is the job of a good producer, is to make me look good. But that is true. I learned all of those skills in the legal marketing world, and I was like, there has to be better places for me to use these skills than this. So I'm trying to find them.
We love a good, consistent workplace, though. That helps you make your movies.
Yeah, the one good thing about where I work is that lawyers will never go away. There will always be work for them, and therefore there will always be work for me. So
that is true. That is a true statement. All right, so let's go back a little bit. How did you get introduced to the horror genre?
Okay, so that's interesting because I've noticed a lot of your guests talk about the movies they get scarred by are horror movies from when they were young. Mm-hmm. I saw almost no horror films when I was a child. My parents were extremely conservative Christian. My dad eventually ended up becoming a Baptist minister, if that gives you a vibe of
where did you grow up?
My dad was in the Coast Guard, so I grew up a whole lot of everywhere.
Oh, okay. So you bounced around a lot.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was a tourist in every state I was in. I was perennially the kid that got made fun of so that the other guy got a break for a year. I would move in to make fun of you because of your shoes, and But listen, I was glad to take one for the team because there was a lot of kids that were able to dodge 1 year's worth of getting beat up or made fun of because the new guy popped in, did his job, and then got the hell out.
Chris.
It was supposed to be funny. I wasn't intending to dive too deep on my traumas, but...
No, I get it. You're like, it's funny. And we're all like, it's okay. You're allowed to be upset about it. And you're like, thanks.
No, I appreciate it. As he wipes a tear away. But because of that, my parents didn't let me watch... I couldn't see anything above PG, let alone a horror film. Mm-hmm. I think probably the only horror film I saw as a child was my father and I stayed up one night on Halloween to watch the 1931 Dracula with Bela Lugosi. And then because my mom, a hypocrite that she may be, wouldn't let me see horror or anything, but she was an avid Stephen King reader. So when Stephen King's It became a miniseries, she watched that. I saw, I think, the first half of it. And I'm sure I was scared by it, but I don't have any distinct memories of that. But I would say, honestly, it was like mid to late high school before I was even able to see horror movies. So, ironically, I was the appropriate age that you're supposed to start watching R-rated movies when I first started seeing R-rated movies, actually. Yeah. So, probably a very different experience from most.
Yeah. But I am curious, since you discovered horror in your teens, do you remember kind of like what got you into the genre or like maybe one of the first movies you remember concretely?
Yes. Well, what I can tell you is that the movies that made me know that I was a horror fan were not horror movies. They were the little things you could see peeking around the edges of movies that were quote unquote normal. Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, Return to Oz. You know, your classic kinder trauma slate of stuff that would sneak past parents but truly disturb children. And I was really drawn to that. In fact, particularly Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory and the animated Alice in Wonderland from Walt Disney. Because they were safe. I was allowed to have those in the house. One was a Disney movie and one was, based on a popular children's novel. But those films are very dark.
They are.
Psychologically as well as like thematically, just the idea of children either being abandoned by their parents or being taken advantage of for being able to get something. And so that I was really drawn to that, and I didn't really know why. And it wasn't until when, like I said, I was 15, 16, I think at a sleepover, I would have seen the first Alien movie with my friend Juan.
Okay.
He rented it. And so I got lucky because by the time I started watching stuff, I could rent my own. So I wasn't like just like sneaking off and catching something, whatever was on, Cinemax at 3 a.m. So I saw all of the big ones right at the beginning. I saw the first Halloween. I saw the first Alien. I saw the first Jaws. And I was like, oh, that's the thing I was chasing with all of these little pieces of these safe movies that I'd been watching with my family. And then I was absolutely hooked. But yeah, it was those weird kids movies, Watcher in the Woods, and like all of the dark Disney crap.
Yeah.
Okay, but like... Oh, sorry, Terry.
No, I was just going to say the 80s was like rife with those type of movies that were like, it's for kids, and yet sometimes it was because the PG-13 rating hadn't existed yet. And so it's like, you had like R or PG. Yeah. And so there's a lot of those movies that kind of snuck in that probably shouldn't have been for little kids, but we were able to watch it.
Yeah. Well, there's
it's crazy. Like, sorry, we talked about it so much in this podcast of all these movies that I was like, that was for kids?
Yeah. Well, I think I sort of call them latchkey movies in the sense that the way that you were left home as a child and you were able to do anything, I kind of feel like the same thing happened with entertainment. Like the parental responsibility vanished for a while because they were like, oh, it's only PG. There's a rating system. That's fine. As long as it's not R-rated, my kid can watch it. And so like there was nobody minding the store. So I saw all kinds of crap that, that would have been very disturbing to a 9-year-old mind, but my parents wouldn't have known any better, because it was like, it was from Disney. Of course he can watch Return to Witch Mountain,
Like when my teacher said, oh yeah, Watership Down, the animated movie is totally fine to show in class. And I almost fucking threw up in my 4th grade classroom. Anyway, that will
I've never seen that movie. That's one that I've never seen.
It's a lot. I'm surpurped no one's brought that to this show, honestly.
I am too.
Truth be told, it would have been on my list had I known that nobody had watched it. In fact, it wasn't until the last episode of yours that I heard that I didn't know somebody had brought up The Brave Little Toaster. I would have been like, oh, that absolutely needs to be on the list too.
See, those are the movies that I'm really surprised. It always surprises me what movies people come with, and then there are those ones that you feel like everyone talks about having some sort of like trauma surrounding, and yet no one has ever brought them. And so like there is a slew of movies, Watership Down, The Brave Little Toaster. There's like some during the 80s that like I'm really surprised no one has brought yet.
We probably just all
The Brave Little Toaster too.
We probably just all assume they're on like the Mount Rushmore of Disturbia, and so we just assume someone else has picked them already, I will tell you though, Mary Beth, if you thought Watership Down was rough, I highly both recommend and do not recommend the director's follow-up film, Plague Dogs.
Oh yeah, I've heard of that, and I've like always thought about it, but I'm like, I just don't think I like fully need that in my life currently. So I'm very aware of it.
Yeah, I was 28 when I saw it, and it destroyed me. It was brutal.
Yeah.
But it's great. It's a great movie, but it's absolutely devastating.
I've never even heard of this movie.
Yeah. Like I said, I both recommend and do not recommend it in equal measure.
It's very much one of those movies that you're like, watch it at your own risk.
Possible carriers of the bubonic plague. Okay.
No. It's fucked.
Wow. All right.
Yeah. No, it's great.
All right.
And it's the same creative team from Watership Down. John Hurt comes back for one of the voices.
Oh, for fuck's sake.
So, God, especially if you're a dog lover, it is a tough watch.
Wow. So. It looks like it was retroactively given a PG-13 rating according to IMDb.
Does not surprise me. It's like one of those things.
A movie is bad when it gets a retroactive PG-13 rating. Yeah. You're like, oh.
It's like one of those situations where like the filmmakers had no idea the dark power they had harnessed. Like Tobe Hooper thinking he was going to get a PG for Texas Chainsaw Massacre because he's like, there's not a lot of blood in it. Like that's not the point, man.
It's not the point. So it sounds like when you were a kid, you obviously didn't have the access to a lot of horror movies, but were you easily scared watching the movies you were able to see, or what was your like tolerance level for scares, both as a kid and then I guess when you finally were able to watch like Alien and some of the big horror films?
Yeah, I'm not particularly affected by what I would call like jump scare type of horror.
Okay.
I'm very susceptible to being disturbed by the implications of something. My favorite kind of horror is the stuff that doesn't on its surface seem to be deeply disturbing, but the longer you spend working it through your brain, the more horrifying it becomes.
Oh, it's like the Plague Dogs.
Yeah, exactly. Adorable cartoon dogs that also might have bubonic plague. Yeah. But like, so it's one of the reasons why the Cronenberg's The Fly really hit me strongly because it was one of the early horror films I had seen. And it's funny because the stuff that bothered everybody else, the throwing up on the donut and the fingernails falling, all that was gross. I could understand it was gross, but I wasn't bothered by it in the way that I was the insinuation in the end of the movie that he was trying to bring his wife and child into a machine and merge all of their unique essences into a single living being that was all of them and not any one of them. That fucked my brain forever because it didn't happen. They insinuated it, and the idea that thing could happen, and what happens to you, what happens to your individuality, what happens to the physicality of your body, like, you know, it was a movie that, because I tend to, while I don't believe what my parents believed, I do tend to be somewhat still spiritual. So the idea that a machine could strip away your spirituality by just sort of mushing it up like bubblegum with two other people was, I couldn't get my head around it.
I was going to ask about if religion had anything to do with influencing the kind of the more existential, and like not fully, but like it's because I did not grow up at all in a similar situation, but I did grow up Catholic, and I still find myself like thinking about that stuff, even though I was not even particularly in like a strict Catholic family. Like spirituality, if you're exposed to it as a kid for however long, I feel like does make you it makes you more prone to being a more existential weirdo.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
And I mean that with kindness, but like, was that something that you were like as a kid? Like, were you kind of existentially terrified of a lot? Like, did things more existentially terrify you as a kid, or did that kind of come into your mind more as you grew up?
Well, I think I only recognize as an adult that I was absolutely like that as a kid. When I look back, I realize that I spent a lot of time when someone would look at something at face value, because that's what children do frequently, is they see the object and there is a sense of concrete and permanence to it. And it's not until later that you watch a movie and you understand symbolism and representation. But my brain was always going to the, what about the fringe circumstance that this thing doesn't apply to, or what? So I spent a ton of time thinking of like horrifying outcomes and possibilities. Like, I'll give you an example. In The Wizard of Oz, I remember a scene where they had to choose to go one of two directions, and they like did a whole dance number about which direction they were going to go down on the road. And the haunting thing to me was, at one moment they went one way, but the camera stayed on the shot of the other road they didn't go down for about 5 seconds. And then they just followed them wherever they went. For the next like 15 minutes watching that movie, I was like, were they trying to tell us why did they keep looking at that road? Was that the right road? Is this everything that's going to happen is the wrong choice, right? That's what you're telling me.
You had so much anxiety as a child.
Yeah.
You had so much anxiety. I just want to hug little Chris and be like, it's okay.
Yeah. So yes, I would say I was very easy to scare, but not in, I guess you would say, the traditional sense of being scared. It was finding the things that I think probably adults were trying to tell other adults about existentially, but like this 9-year-old was accidentally picking up. So.
Oh, Chris. Oh,
sleep
that's
well,
so
everybody.
Sad. Oh, baby. Well, I'm curious then, as you have grown up and as you've become such a horror fan, is what most recently has brought that fear into your heart and mind? Or do you still experience that fear even?
I mean, I do. Less about movies than about life. I find movies to be a great place to go to not be scared of things, even horror movies. Because I know that they're scripted, and in a way it's a safe space to be able to work through your shit, knowing it's not going to destroy you in the end. But the types of movies that do scare me now do still have a lot to do with implication, or at least the build-up more than the scare. And these are probably cliches, but certainly there are two franchises that have both found footage franchises, and then one other fake documentary film that have haunted me in different ways. Hell House LLC is very good at twisting the knife
that
very
movie
slowly.
Is fucking scary.
Yeah, and so much of what is scary about it to me is that the camera holds on a thing for a very long time and something hasn't quite happened, or has it happened? And there's that question always. It's not that they're getting chased down the hall by a monster. It's that they're not sure if that thing turned its head. And that is very effective for me, which is why the other one, Horror in the High Desert, is another one, because I've never seen a movie that's better at milking the terror inherent in almost nothing happening. It's such a delicate balance from like terrifying to boring. And like so many found footage films fall into the boring camp, unfortunately. But what Dutch does in those movies is sort of miraculous. And then the third one, which I think taps into what I was talking about earlier, which is that the implication more than the actual seeing of it, is Savage Land. The last 40 minutes of that movie where they show you still photographs and you do all the work of what happened right before it, what happened right after it, what is this telling you because of one fraction of a second captured in an image, it's I think probably my favorite found footage film of all time, because it found a way to do something that no other found footage film has done, which is take 27 pictures and tell the story of the loss of an entire town. It's phenomenal.
Did I make you watch that, Terry?
You did. I had to I was looking it up. I was like, which one was this one?
I'm pretty sure that's one of the found footage movies that I said, hey, you have to, like, for our found footage series. Okay.
Yep, it was. And I found that so incredibly effective. And also I found it such an interesting way to do like a spoiler alert, people, if you want to skip ahead 10 seconds. The start of a zombie uprising. Mm-hmm. Like, what an intriguing way to do that. And so I just, that one really, I was really impressed with that one.
And that movie,
if y'all haven't seen it, it's streaming pretty much everywhere for free. It's pretty short and it's good as fuck. Okay, sorry.
And it hits all the points that I love, which is, one, it was a new and creative way of doing a thing that we've seen 1,000 times before. Two, it was very practical in terms of expense. Most of the film was studying 27 still photographs. Three, like you said, it sort of reinvents a mythology or a creature or a concept we've seen before in an interesting way. And then the last one is it had something really profound to say socially. And like that's the hat trick right there. You know what I mean? That's you can't do more than that in a single film.
Check. Great.
Got them all.
Yep. Oh, so good.
Okay, well, Savage Land Love aside, what movie are we talking about today, Chris?
Well, obviously, because of all of the movies I've listed, you would assume that I was going to bring up the beloved child's adventure film, Cloak and Dagger.
Cloak and Dagger! All right, so this is actually one that I don't think as many people might have heard of or are familiar with. So, in Cloak and Dagger, a young boy, played by a very young Henry Thomas, and his imaginary friend end up on the run while in possession of a top-secret spy gadget inside of a video game called Cloak and Dagger.
Heck yeah. All right. So, take us back, Chris. How old were you when you saw this? How did you see this? What was the setting? Give us your horror story. I want to hear all the details.
Yeah. So, this is an interesting one because this is one of the few times where you'll probably have someone say, here's a movie that scarred me for life, and I kept watching it over and over. But that was the case with this. Because, like I told you, I would watch movies that were quote-unquote safe, according to my parents, because they'd had these little peaks of the darkness. And I found a lot of darkness in this movie. I don't know that other people would have necessarily seen it. Kids my age wouldn't necessarily have seen it, but I did. And so I revisited this one a lot. I probably would have been maybe 8 or 9 when I saw it the first time, because it wouldn't have been first run. I didn't see it in theaters. It was on whatever basic cable or borrowed from my mom's friend's VHS closet. But and then I had the tape all the time and I would watch it over and over and over. The first time I saw it was with family, but I watched it numerous times after that alone. And the reason that I'm so drawn to it is because it feels like a bit of a wolf in sheep's clothing to me, in the sense that it's a movie that seems like a fun fantasy fulfillment. It's a kid that wants to pretend to be a spy, and then he gets to actually participate in a spy adventure. Except in this one, which, by the way, I don't know if you guys knew this, it is written by Tom Holland, who wrote Fright Night.
Sure is.
And it is directed by Richard Franklin, who directed Psycho 2, which was written by Tom Holland. So there's a pretty impressive creative team behind it. But what they created was, what if a child's fantasy came true, but it actually remained as dangerous as a spy circumstance would be for an adult spy dealing with it. And the ramifications of that in the movie really, really fucked with me. But so what the movie told me was, adults are going to fail you. Parents are not going to believe you. The systems that are supposed to protect you, police officers, the airport security, they're either not going to believe you or they're going to be incompetent, which means you're on your own. It doesn't matter if you're 8. The world is going to let you down. So be more prepared than you are, kid. And it seems like a harsh message, but at the same time, I think for the right kid, that's actually in some ways a comforting message in addition to being a scary message. And it was reinforced by many of the things that happened in this movie. I was shocked as I went back because I remembered the moments, but the viscerality, is that a word? Viscerality? Sure.
Sure.
I'm going to coin it. I think it's a word as of today.
But the reacting to it again, seeing it as an adult, there's a moment where they're going to trade. He's going to trade the video game for his friend who has been kidnapped, this tiny little, 5 or 6 year old girl. And they say, give me the game. He holds the game out over the river and he says, if you come any closer, you're going to be fishing for it, like insinuating he's going to drop it. The guy nods to his thug up on a cliff, who then decides to hoist this 5-year-old girl out over the edge. And they say, do you want to start dropping stuff or do you want to make a trade? And I just remember thinking, what was a 9-year-old doing watching this movie where they were literally threatening to just fling a child off a cliff? Or open fire with a silencer in public at this kid, doesn't matter who they might hit in the interim. And, people say all the time, you hear things like, oh, you could never get this movie made today. And usually what they mean is, this movie was racist and you're not allowed to say that anymore. But I kind of feel like this is a movie you couldn't make today.
Yes.
It's so funny that you bring that up, because as I was watching this movie, and I'll get to my own story about it, but this tangent I found so fascinating watching this as an adult, because a lot of times when people say, oh, this movie is for kids and adults, like I'm thinking the one that immediately jumps into my mind is Shrek, where it's like, well, we've thrown in some adult jokes for the adults that will go over the kids' heads, supposedly, and that will be like so that the adults can take their kids to see this movie and there'll be something that might entertain them. I am watching this movie and I'm like, this movie, if you were to swap out the kid for an adult actor, this would have worked perfectly. Yep. This is an adult movie that is centered on kids, but it treats the kids and the stakes around it as seriously as an adult movie. And we've talked about this numerous times on the podcast, where it's like a lot of the movies from the 80s, particularly the ones that have longevity to them, are the movies in which someone hires a director that makes a horror movie or a movie that is for adults, aka Richard Franklin, and you have them direct a movie for a kid, and you're like, do what you do, but do it for a kid. And we get stuff like Cloak and Dagger. And that is something that we do not see anymore because people are afraid of terrifying kids or fucking up kids, I guess. I don't know. But it's just like, this movie is like, this is why I love the 80s so much in terms of like kid movies, because it's dangerous. Like when he holds that girl over, I was like, whoa. But it was the moment beforehand that like really surprised me where Davy is going up the stairs and the scientist is coming down and he gets shot, and then he literally falls over the side and splats, and there's a shot of him and you don't see like the blood splat out, but there's a shot of him down there and there is a stain of blood afterwards. I'm like, this movie is violent. And that was the moment I was like, oh, we're not fucking around.
Yeah.
Well, and like, I think, Chris, you called it Latchkey Kid, like, or Latchkey's Kid, or Latchkey Cinema. And I think that's such a good way to put it, though, because, like, so Tyler Dupay at Dread Central has written about this movie a lot and, like, has talked to me about, like, Latchkey Kid horror, basically, a lot. And this made me think about those discussions because it really was, like, so indicative of an era where kids, like, this young were left to their own devices when their parents had to go to work, especially because his dad in this is a single dad. His mom passed away. He has to work as an air traffic control man. And he's got to go, and like he needs to go to work. And all of this happens because he's at work. And a lot of those movies from the 80s are because the parents are at work or they're distracted. And I think nowadays that kind of parenting is so frowned upon. Like, Justin, I don't have children. I don't actually know how to parent. So just putting that out there, I could be full of shit. But just seeing what, like, from my friends to my family to like what's online, like that kind of parenting is just so the opposite. Now, I'm not saying there isn't a latchkey, like there aren't these things happening, but I think the trend
helicopter
overall,
parents,
yeah,
huge trend.
it is. Like, the thing is, like, you're way more involved in your kid's life rather than you're not having any concept of what's going on. And I think it's hard to make cinema now that addresses that. I think Psycho Goreman's a really good example of doing that kind of movie, but
that's a
we
good
only
point.
get that's like one movie out of all of the other movies. So it is really interesting, I think, as parenting has changed and like our relationships to our parents have changed. Like horror cinema has had a complete like kind of rebrand in a way.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting that because Henry Thomas was in this and he was in E.T., both of which are films about the parents of different genders, both of whom are single parents dealing with the fallout of whatever has happened in the relationships. In his case, it was, his wife died. In her case, I believe they were divorced, and we don't hear a lot about what happened with the father, but we get insinuations. But both of the movies are about like this era, this Wild West from the mid 70s to the late 80s, early 90s, when we were just understanding what the fallout of things like women being able to get a divorce without having to have been physically abused in front of a crowd. You know what I mean? And so you were seeing families separated, and what we would consider at the time, it was like the fallout of that. But like, no, what you're actually describing is people being able to go off and have their own lives, and they were still figuring out how to fucking do it. You know what I mean? Because in the entire recorded history of relationships in America, that hadn't been an option. So like there weren't things like what we have in places now, where there's after school programs and there was daycare to the degree that didn't exist in the 60s and 70s because you couldn't send your kid somewhere or you were terrible, So it's an interesting transitional era, and I think the movies represent it really well. My parents were married and still are married, but my father was in the military. He was in the Coast Guard, and he was gone. He was off on assignment most of the time. So that was another thing that spoke to me about this movie. Although his dad came home at night, there was always this distance between him and his dad because of the job he always had to be at. And I did relate to that. So I did think it was interesting that the movie, while the father was a good guy, it took his son being literally in physical danger that he was told about by someone other than his son to just get him to leave work. Like that was how much it took in order to like disengage his father from his professional life. And, can't lie, that didn't connect with me.
I mean, I love my stepdad, but he just worked so hard that, like, no matter what, like, it was impossible to get him away from work. And, like, you know that they're doing it because they want to provide, but when you're a kid, you're like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
And, like, even at the beginning when Davy says, I hate you, and he's like, I know you don't mean that. And, like, it was nice to see a dad, like, not scream and, like, freak out. Because in the 80s, again, the dad's always the scary one. The dad's always going to beat the kid or, like, freak out. And seeing this dad, like, be a gentle parent and be like, you're just upset about your mom. And he looks super, like, the mustachioed guy from the 80s. It was nice to see a dad who wasn't, like, threatening to whip his kid with the belt or, like, yelling at him for having emotions and was actually, like, encouraging him to have feelings, which, again, like, we still don't see that a lot about encouraging men to have feelings. So having a movie like this be like, hey, despite your dad not being around, he does actually care about your emotions. Like, that's nice. It was nice to see that, especially in the current situation we live in. It's like,
100%.
This is a dad who's trying his goddamn best.
He is trying.
100%. And all the credit in the world to Dabney Coleman for the dual performances in this movie, too. Because he's, first of all, he does what you said, which is he really taps into the nuance of the character where his son is not wrong that he's distant, but it's not that he's not trying. He's just not equipped, Men of his generation were not super equipped for that. Mm-hmm. But then the thing that I love the most, which is the reason that they had Dabney Coleman play both roles, is because both aspects of that character are his dad. Like, the reason that he likes Jack Flack is because Jack Flack is a government agent, and he does look like his dad. He's just the cool version of his dad that wants to hang around with him. And that's such a beautiful sentiment when you think about it. It wasn't just stunt casting, because Dabney Coleman is great and can play a dual role. It really genuinely meant something that his son, even in his fantasy world, where there's this awesome super spy that he emulates and wants to be, it looks like his dad. And it's because he needed to create that presence because he didn't have the actual one, And I don't know. There's something about that that's very powerful, but also very sad.
I think that's what kind of makes this movie so interesting to me is that he's a flawed character, but he's not. I think a lot of times, and I think you touched on this a little bit, Mary Beth, a lot of times in the 80s in particular, like the father figure is the disciplinarian. He's the one that is, there's the classic scenes in those movies where he's sitting at the lunch breakfast table or whatever, but he has a newspaper up and he is just totally divorced from the rest of his family. in his presence. And so it was interesting to me to see a father here who obviously cares for his son and did not, like, when Davy said, "I hate you," I was like, ooh, how is this, what's going to happen? And the response was, "I know you don't believe that." And then there's also the idea earlier, I think it's earlier, where he talks about how, not all heroes are people out there saving the world or going on spy missions. They're the ones here present. And that, so like, there's this complexity to this character that I was really surprised to see. And I it's probably because Tom Holland wrote it, and Tom Holland, I think, is a very good writer. But like, I was surprised to see that in this film, because it's not just one way or the other. It's not that like the kid is right and the parent is wrong, which is another trope we see a lot of times. It's that they just aren't communicating with each other, and they're both grieving the fact that the one person of their family is no longer with them. And so, like, I don't know. It's just, I thought it so interesting that it was not leaning into one way or another with his performance.
Yeah. It reminded me of Gerald McCraney in Neverending Story. Both of them are very similar characters in that they're complex masculinity. They're not cruel, but they both have sons who are creatives. They're artists, they're dreamers, and they can't get their heads around that. They can't understand their kid because of that. And so it's interesting because the boundary isn't necessarily you need to get a job or stop, it's, I don't understand the way you look at the world. It doesn't make sense to me. And obviously for me, as someone who was a horror fan that was raised by Christian parents, I can understand the idea that your parents, I believe it was the sage Will Smith who once said, parents just don't understand.
They really don't.
They don't.
They really don't.
But I will say, having spoken about all of what we talked about so far, there are specific moments of this film that still stick with me as utterly disturbing. These are the ones that dug in deep. The rest of that stuff, the idea that, the world's not looking out for you, you got to look out for yourself. But there are 3 moments in the film that I want to mention that stuck with me forever. One is,
hell yeah.
In any other movie where grown bad guys are chasing a child, you would have buffoons, right? They don't know how to do their job. They're goofballs. They run into each other. And these guys were deadly. Like there was no jokes. They weren't like a punchline. They wanted to murder this child, and they were going to murder this child. Like that hit home with me, because I was like, that's what made it feel to me like there were no brakes on this car. There was no point at which, there was no, like, what do they call it? The trombone cops, like in Halloween 5, the wacky music when they walk in the room. There was none of that to release the tension that these guys weren't serious. So that was one. The second was, there is a moment in this movie, it's sort of twofold, where the only adult in his life that has trusted him and believes what he's saying, the video game guy that plays the game and discovers that what he said is true, is murdered. And then there's a moment where, in order to not get caught by the bad guys, he has to climb in the trunk and lay down next to the corpse of his friend who he just found out was killed. That is a lot to take in as a 9-year-old character, let alone the 9-year-old boy watching in the audience. And then the third one, and this is the one that wrecked me, I think, the most, was when I was young, my parents didn't get me, and so we didn't see eye to eye. But the one person who did always stand up for me was my grandmother. She was very protective and maternal. So when this kid is stabbed in the back by what are the grandparent stand-ins, and it turns out not only are they not there to protect him, but they're actually the biggest enemy of all in this story, that was devastating to me. The moment that she pulls off a glove and we realize that the person with the missing fingers is the seemingly kindly old woman and her husband, and they're going to be the ones that do you in. That is the social contract is broken now. I, as an 8-year-old boy, believe nothing in the world is safe now, And I just remember carrying that with me for a long, long time, about the idea that, like, no one who looks safe, it might be safe. I don't know. Which maybe is good. Maybe that's why I wasn't thrown in a van as a child, because I was a little more, But that's what that movie told me all the time. It's like, there may not be anybody you can trust. And that was
So I'm glad you bring up the old couple, Eunice and George, who, interestingly enough, were married in real life. Mm-hmm. And Jeanette Nolan, who played Eunice, was she was in some Alfred Hitchcock movies, which Alfred Hitchcock was a big influence on Richard Franklin. Richard Franklin considers himself like a devotee of Alfred Hitchcock, so that's kind of why Psycho 2 was such a big thing for him. And this movie feels like a kid's version of one of the kind of political thrillers that Alfred Hitchcock would do back in the time. I always get this movie confused with War Games, and I was firmly convinced that I had never...
Me too!
I was convinced that I had never seen this movie, because I see the cover of it, and I was like, this doesn't look familiar to me whatsoever. And I was like, I don't think I've seen this one. I think I've only ever seen War Games, and I just confused the two of them. But the moment when he is in the car, and it was like... I will admit, I was surprised to find out that the grandparents were the older couple were the people masterminding it. That surprised me as an adult, but also I realized it like maybe a few seconds beforehand, because I had this intense feeling of deja vu that she was going to pull off her gloves and it was going to be, 3 fingers. And so I have seen this movie, but I had no recollection of this entire film except for that moment that instilled in me this image of this old woman missing 2 fingers that I have for years. I have not thought about it in a long time. It's not like it's haunted me every night, but it is a moment that I don't remember what it was from, but it is ingrained in my head. And the moment he's in that car, I was like, wait, I think I've seen this before. I think I know what's going to happen. And that moment I was like, yep, that's the moment that has been stuck in my head since I saw this as a kid.
Yeah. No, it's funny. I have that, wow. I don't know, I call it sort of like the kid movie drift, where like for a few years before I saw this again as an adult, I thought it was Joey Kramer that was in this, not Henry Thomas. Like I thought it was the kid that was from, was it Over the Top or whatever? There was a certain look for a child between the ages of 9 and 12 that was like Barrett Oliver and Henry Thomas. And, there was a class of child that was in all of these movies. And so they almost became interchangeable. And at a certain point, I didn't know who was who. So I thought I'd seen movies, like I'd seen Daryl, which is the one about the robot kid with Barrett Oliver, but I hadn't seen that one. I'd actually seen this other one that, So, but yeah, I know what you mean. Like some weird thing will stick indelibly in your head, but nothing else about it will. It's just like this free-floating piece of memory that is not attached to anything else.
Yeah, because I remembered nothing about this movie. I'm like, I feel like this is a movie that I would have seen as a kid because my dad loved these types of films, like War Games. We used to watch that all the time. And so it's like, I know I probably have seen this, but I have absolutely no recollection until that moment when it was like, oh, this is that movie. I have seen this before. But I'm curious, Mary Beth, because you had never seen this either. So what was your experience watching this for the first time as an adult?
So I had heard about, I'd edited a piece about it. I've heard about it a bunch. And I was just like, oh, that sounds really interesting. But was not something that really was in my brain as a movie that I really needed to check out. I wasn't sure it would resonate the same way with me. I was wrong. I especially love this integration. The integration of the invisible friend was a little bit weird to me at first. I was like, what in the shit is happening here? But then it all comes to a head when he seems to trick the small boy into shooting and killing a man. And then the small boy crushes him under his foot, and then he dies.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, this is truly about the death of childhood. Literally that scene is the death of childhood. That boy pulled a gun on a man and shot him dead in the streets.
Yep.
Yeah.
After getting fired at by a fucking machine gun because the guy thought he was talking to another person and it was just his imaginary friend. I was like, I didn't think the movie was fucking around because the kid was in so much danger the whole time. But that moment, I was my jaw was on the ground. I was like, oh, he's killing a man. Oh.
Yeah, it's brutal. And, I as a child, now I understand the symbology of it, right? He didn't see the guy over there. Did he see the guy? He didn't see the guy. As a child, I was like, I saw the guy, and he looked where the guy was. What is Jack? Is Jack pretend? Is Jack's not pretend? Because that guy saw Jack. Earlier in the movie, Jack pulled a video game off the shelf and threw it to him. At another point in the movie, he was able to look around a corner that the kid couldn't see around and tell him that something was coming. And I just remember thinking, I know nobody else cares about this. But I think Jack is real. I think Jack is something else. I don't know what he is. He's an extra-dimensional being disguising himself as the pretend friend of this little boy. I don't know. And so for a long time, that movie, I thought there was a supernatural element to it that I was the only one
so did I
recognized it. Nobody else was talking about that.
For a hot second, I was like, have I watched this movie wrong the whole time? And this is actually a weird supernatural, what's that? Is it Brain Scan? Where it's the video game where
Yes.
like the guy comes, like the weird man comes out of his head or something from that video game.
Oh,
Yeah.
I was
yeah.
like, is this going to be like a weird brain scan situation? No, it wasn't. But I did have that thought for a second. I was like,
And then, I started thinking at a certain point, I was like, wait a minute, this is like Peter Pan. Like, he's Tinkerbell and he's dying because the kid doesn't believe. Like, it's not imaginary creature going away. This is a real thing that just died because this
he's
kid killed it.
bleeding. Isn't he
Like,
bleeding?
So he killed it.
Yeah.
Yes. When he crushes the thing, he suddenly starts
He starts
bleeding from holes in his
bleeding.
chest.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And it's, again, like, that's what I mean. It's like I get it. In the abstract, that symbolically means he can't be a child anymore because of what he's faced. But what you actually put on screen was our boy's childhood hero bleeding from several holes in his gut before he vanishes. That's what you made us watch. So
Yeah. And I thought it was interesting because, like, the character that is imaginary, Jack Flack, who I keep thinking everyone is calling him Jack Black in this
Same.
film because
Me too.
there's
I was like,
a
Jack
couple
Black in
points
this
where I was
movie.
like, they're calling him Jack Black, and I'm fairly certain they're not saying Flack with an F. But regardless, he becomes like almost like a monster in some ways. Like, he is trying to get this kid to kill these men. Like, he's like, go get the gun, and the kid's like, no. He's like trying to, step away from any sense of him having to become an adult and kill someone. And so then what does he do? He has him play the game, the kind of gambit game where, like, he's running and then they end up shooting the other guy. And I'm like, that is really manipulative and dark. Yes, it saved the kid. Yes, he probably had to do it, but it's really dark when you think about it. It's like, this imaginary friend is egging him on to cause death. And then what happens at the end? He basically is forced to pick up a gun and shoot this man. And I was my jaw was on the floor as well, Mary Beth. I was like, what the fuck is this movie?
If he's an imaginary friend, what does that mean about this little, like, Davy's subconscious?
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, because imaginary friends are really, like, extensions of ourselves if we want to get weird here. And, like, that means that guy, if he is an imaginary friend, like, is an extension of Davy. And so does Davy, like, just have, like, I mean, Davy might know, like, this is what I have to do, but he has to have someone trick him to do it because it's too much. I don't know, but I was thinking about that and I was like...
So, yeah, Davy is like a young Dexter, and Jack Flack is his dark passenger, basically.
Wow. Wow. We've cracked it. That's it. That's the podcast episode, everyone. This is the precursor to Dexter.
Yeah. Of course, we also just have to end with, they hit a bomb inside of a 6-year-old girl's walkie-talkie. Like, they were going to blow up a 6-year-old child.
Literally love, like, old people and no adult cares about children in this movie until, like, the beginning and the end. And it's just, like, actually wild that it's not even, like, you're not even trying to make them caricatures. Like, this is a movie that, like, would be so easy to make, like, super silly and goofy and campy, but they make it feel relatively grounded for what it is. Like, for a spy movie with a child.
Yeah. Well,
that it's like, wait, this actually does feel dangerous.
There's a scene where two thugs talk about how they should get paid extra because they're going to have to murder a child. There's no discussion of the morality of the situation, only of the pay of the situation. And that is haunting when you think about it. That man didn't blink twice about the idea that you have to shoot an 8-year-old in the head. He only was like, the consideration is financial at this point. And that is like, that's mind-blowing that a movie from whatever it was, 82, 83, was having characters talk so flippantly about the idea of murdering a child. You know, it's... Whew.
I love the whole lead up to the more actiony part of it, where we have like the scientist that gets shot and falls down the stairs. I was like, okay, this is wild. And then when he gets home and the phone call happens and it's like, is this David G. Osborne? And he's like, good. And I'm like, okay, this is, slasher when a stranger calls type territory that we're going in right now. And then all of a sudden he's home alone and the ball goes through the window and these men are literally breaking. Like, you think of the house as like a safe place. And a lot of times in the movies, people run into the house and they lock the door and you're like, okay, someone's going to get in. But these people are breaking the glass. They are kicking down the doors. He is like punching his way through the doors to get to this kid. And I'm just like, this is mental. I don't know what to say about this. This is a fucking kids movie and it's a home invasion at the very beginning. I just was like, I don't even know. It puts the kids in so much danger right away that I'm like, I don't know if they're going to make it through. And that's like the first time I've ever watched a kids movie where I'm like, are they both going to survive the end of this, and what's going to be left of them if they do? Because this is harrowing in a way that I was not expecting.
Yeah. Well, and the way that it juxtaposes the things that a kid would normally be enjoying versus the way that Davy is feeling because of the circumstance he's in while he's there, right? Where he's hiding under the table at the lunch table, and the two people that are sitting at the table are literally making fun of him. The guy grabs a salt shaker and pretends to call J. Edgar Hoover. And then when he gets on a tour boat and they're going through a nice little tour of San Antonio's Riverwalk, meanwhile, this dude has a knife in his hand. He's getting ready to shiv this kid on a boat in front of 30 other people. And they're just slowly working their way around the boat, one seat at a time. And it's like, oh my God, this can't be more tense than it is, you know? It's
Hitchcockian.
Yeah.
For like, it is like, this movie is really, like, I can understand. Before I even knew who directed this movie, I was like, well, this person loves Hitchcock. And then I realized who directed it, and I was like, oh, well, okay, this makes perfect sense to me. But it's like, that sequence in and of itself is something that Hitchcock would have put in one of his movies with adults, where it's like, you're just waiting for someone to be murdered in front of everyone. But it is like a game of chess where you're like moving places and moving seats and trying to get closer and closer. I'm just like, this is great.
Yeah. Well, it's like, I think you said, Mary Beth, it was like, give an adult the opportunity to make a movie that has kids in it. They don't treat it like it's a kid's film just because there are kids as the main characters. They treated it like this was a suspense thriller that had real stakes. Yep. And the fact that there were 9-year-olds in it actually made it more terrifying, not less.
There's also this bit of dialogue that I wrote down where, and I'm not exactly sure where this happens in the movie, but Flack is like enjoying the excitement of this, where he says, this is getting good. And Davy's response is, they're trying to kill us. And his response is, you can't kill me. And I'm like,
Yeah. Once again, Davy has a death wish subconsciously. I'm just kidding.
And then he gets in the phone and he's calling his dad, and the van shows up and runs into the phone booth. I'm just like, it's
too much. I know.
There's so much child endangerment in this that I was blown away. I was blown away.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I genuinely believe, you know, like we said earlier, you couldn't make this movie now. And I think what you talked about, you said, like, I don't know why it changed, that we don't want to scare or disturb kids anymore. I don't think that has anything to do with it. I think in the 80s, or at least the early 80s, they were much less worried about a movie not making its money back because parents had a problem with it. Because latchkey kids could go watch stuff. You drop your kid off at the mall and they go see whatever the hell they want. It has become now a circumstance where everybody knows everything that happens in a movie, and more than likely it would be the parents that complained that there was a disturbing moment in a children's film, not a child that complained that they were disturbed by it. Children, by and large, are very resilient when it comes to art, about understanding it, even instinctively understanding, even if they don't know that it's not real, they have some sense of it, that it's a story and that there's something to take away from it. It's parents that think that kids can't handle artistic storytelling. And so for me, I think the reason you couldn't make it today is because parents would be in an uproar, not because kids would actually be bothered by it. I think that's
absolutely. That's 100% what it is. Like, I don't think a kid would be bothered. I know, like, my cousins, like, they know what Ghostface is without ever seeing Scream. Like, they know what these things are, and they're not scared of them. Again, like, my aunt's not going to show Scream to my 8-year-old nephew or my 8-year-old cousin yet, but, like, they have awareness. They're not stupid. Kids are not dumb. And parents want so quickly to jump on, like, this, like, it's like kind of evangelical, weird, like
won't somebody think of the children?
Yeah. Well, it's like it's a thing that's simple to protect a child from. Instead of protecting them from things that are actually bad, like, this is a super easy one. I can actually just click a button and sign a petition, and then I can be done with it. You know, like, that's as much effort as they want to put in. But, like, actually doing stuff that would help and to protect your kids, it's much more difficult, and people don't want to do that. So, yeah, they've chosen their battles, and usually they're the wrong ones.
Yeah.
So coming full circle, clearly parents can't protect you kids. You're on your own, is all we're saying.
You are. Yep. Sorry, guys.
So all of the 8-year-old listeners of this podcast, please take my advice.
Don't try to break into a video game lab and get embroiled in a spy scheme, everybody. Right. You know, just the usual.
And don't trust the kind old grandma, because she has 3 fingers and she has a that was the other thing. The moment when she is missing her fingers, and then she grabs the cloth and puts it over his face. That is the image that was in my head of this hand coming towards the camera.
Yeah.
and chloroforming him.
The slow and bloodless process of pouring the chloroform onto a rag as they discuss their airline plans later. Like that. Yeah. Oh, God, it's nightmares.
That's my worst fucking nightmare. Someone just like casually going to do that and you can't escape because you're a kid in the middle seat and there ain't no way you're overpowering the two adults like in between you. Yep. Like, shit my pants, like I'm fucked, you know? Like what is the escape route there? Not much. Like
And again, just like the thugs earlier that were talking about killing them without batting an eye, they're literally getting ready to chloroform him, knock him unconscious, and all they can talk about is that their dinner plans were canceled. Like that's how little he matters in the world of what's going on with adults. And like that's so horrifying. Again, I feel like I don't know if Tom Holland would cop to this or Richard Franklin would cop to this, but this movie is very, very cynical about how much the world actually cares about children versus how they say they care about children. I can't believe that wasn't somewhat intentional on their part.
Yeah, same. I also just got a shout out to Tom Holland for giving us Psycho 2 that has been on this podcast, Cloak and Dagger, and Fright Night, and Child's Play. Like, thank you, Tom Holland, for scarring a generation of kids.
I forgot he directed Child's Play.
Yeah.
I'm like, Tom Mancini. Sorry, Tom Holland. You directed enough. You don't need Child's Play. It's fine.
Yeah. No, it's hard to argue. Had his career not gone the direction it did in the 90s with stuff like The Temp and Thinner? Yeah, I feel like he would be remembered as like one of the heavyweights of the 80s. Just in terms of like just the four that you listed. That's an incredible list of accomplishments on its own. If he had never made another movie about that after that, he would be remembered as one of like the giants of the 80s.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I agree with that. I still think he's pretty well revered, but I definitely do agree that like after he made some of those other ones, it was a little bit like, oh, we just dropped off a little bit there. We're not going to think about the 90s. He only existed in the 80s.
Yeah, well, and listen, I'm a big defender of Tom Holland. I might be the only person you've ever spoken to that loves the Langoliers.
Oh, the Langoliers.
Interesting.
Love it.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I actually, no joke, the day that someone wants to make that, I hope they call me because I spec wrote an adaptation of the Langoliers. I have it in my hands right now. It's done. Just need somebody to greenlight it. I found a way to crack it so that it works for a modern story, like a post 9/11 thing where you have to explain all the things for why you could easily bust the door open in an airplane and like all these other I cracked it. I figured out exactly how to tell that story so that it'd be super effective, and I wrote it because I love the concept of the Langoliers so much. I'm so haunted by the idea that you could travel in time, but there's nothing there. Like when you go back, it's empty because everything else moved on, and you're just detritus left behind. Like that is. Remember I said implications. Like that for me, that's far more haunting than going into the past and changing something and screwing something up. Finding out that the moment that you're in time is the only one there is, and you can't go forward and you can't go back because this is all there is. And if you miss it, you're fucked. Anyway. But that's why I love Tom Holland, because it's not a great movie, but there are pieces of greatness in those 4 hours.
Yeah, the only thing I remember because I remember watching that when it came out when did it come out? It was like, what, 90?
I want to say 92 or
95.
93. Oh, 95.
95.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I remember sitting down and watching it, and the only thing I can remember from that is the one character that is like ripping the paper the entire time. Yeah. That's all I remember.
Balky from Perfect Strangers, Bronson Pinchot, yeah.
Have you seen Timekeepers of Eternity, Chris?
No, I didn't know it was available anywhere. Like I know it came to festivals and stuff.
I don't. I very much want to see it at a festival. I don't know where it is, but it's really good. It's really good.
That's the one where they kind of like
takes like every frame and like uses it with paper and like completely reimagines it.
I would love to see it. I assumed I never would because I can't get to festivals much, and I don't think they had the rights to the movie, so it doesn't seem like a thing they could get a like mainstream release for. But yeah, I would love to see it.
Yeah.
I'm like I said, I'm obsessed with that story. I'm obsessed with any story that implies horrible, horrible things that it never actually says. I really like that.
Well, on that beautiful note, Terry, do we want to wrap up and give this our rating out of 5?
That sounds good to me.
All right, Terry, you're up first. How many baby Henry Thomases out of 5 do you give Cloak and Dagger?
Listen, I was surprised with this movie. I again, because I kept confusing this one with War Games, and I wasn't sure if I'd seen it, and I wasn't sure how good it was going to be. The cover is not great. don't judge a book by its cover. I get it, but like the cover looked really bad, and it looked like one of those kind of movies that was maybe made as like a we're going to capitalize on another movie. Like it did not have the same cachet in my head. And so when I sat down to watch this, and I was immediately turned off with the Jack Flack coming flying in with his American flag parachute that zips up. I'm like, okay, what is this? And then when I see the dice rolling in, I was like, okay, what is happening here? And after we got past that moment, I was like, this movie grabbed me and did not let go. I really, really, really enjoyed this. I was afraid for the kids. I was afraid particularly for the little girl, Kim, because like she's not in it a whole lot, but like the literal ticking time bomb in her hand the entire movie, it feels like. I was blown away. This is 4 young Henry Thomases out of 5 for me. I think this is a great introduction to kids, for kids to get introduced to adult films, and I loved it. What about you, Mary Beth?
I loved it. I was actually really surprised how much fun I had with this and how like tense it was. Again, I was like looking for like, oh, okay, we're gonna get like an Ernest Scared Stupid kind of version, like a Home Alone version of like a spy movie, which I was fine. Like again, not like nothing wrong with that, because I think like those also like have a lot of value, but I just wasn't expecting that it was going to be so intense and like all about child endangerment of multiple children who are very small. So I'm gonna have to give this, I think, like 4 little baby Henry Thomases. I think that's what I'm gonna give this one. All right, Chris, you have the final word. How many baby Henry Thomases do you give?
I mean, obviously on a classic BHT scale, I'm going to go 5. How can I go anything less than 5? This is the movie that formed me. This is the movie that made me the cynical, terrified child that grew into this cynical, somewhat empty man. No, but I do genuinely believe that this movie was punching well above its weight. Like, I don't think the people that were making it, not the director and writer, but like the producers, the people that commissioned them, I think they got something that was far more complex and maybe a little darker than they were expecting. And it could be one of the reasons why you hadn't seen it, Mary Beth, or really heard much about it other than a few people talking about it, why it doesn't have the cachet that something like an E.T. does, is because I don't think it's a crowd pleaser in the traditional sense of what this type of movie would normally be. I think it's a little more thoughtful, a little bit more sad and cynical. And for that, having seen it at the right time, like it's one of my ideal perfect views as a child. So I would give it straight 5 Henry Thomases.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us to talk about Cloak and Dagger and getting me to finally rewatch this movie that I thought I had never seen before. Where can the listeners find you online? And the floor is yours to plug away about whatever you can talk about, your movie, etc.
Yeah, well, so I'll tell you where you can see the movie first. POV Horror is the distributor that is putting it out. You can see that now on POV Horror. You can see there on their app, on the website. If you have a membership, it's free streaming. If you don't, I think it's like $1 or something. But I promise you, I wouldn't lead you wrong. My movie's worth $1. So if you have to pay $1 there. So you can see it there. We've submitted to other platforms. So depending on when this comes out, who knows, fingers crossed, it might be on Tubi or Amazon Prime. We're working through that process. But for sure, right now, it's available on POV Horror. And then you can find me on Blue Sky. That's the platform I'm spending the majority of my time on. I really don't spend a whole lot of time on Instagram because I don't take pictures of anything unless it's going in a movie. So there's no reason for me to be over there. But yeah, so I'm on Blue Sky. It's CK Vander Kaay is my handle. And I am on Twitter, but only long enough to delete all of my stuff and leave a note that says where you can find me on Blue Sky. So yeah, but that's where I'm at. And as Mary Beth knows, I'm always working on projects. So if you're interested in following what I'm doing, I'm always in the midst of, I think right now I'm in pre-production on 2 and production on a 3rd project simultaneously, all of which are fake documentary or found footage type projects because that's what I love. So that's what I'm up to.
I'm in one of them, in fact.
Yes. I was actually going to tell you I finished the script last night. So not the new one, not the new one that you've already shot for, the one that I told you about. Yeah. So
Chris and I collaborate quite a bit, y'all. We just want to make weird movies, and it's fun to make weird movies with cool people who get it.
It's true.
But listeners, you've heard from us. We want to hear from you. Was Cloak and Dagger a beloved watch for you? Did you just watch it for the first time because of the podcast? You should let us know by sending us an email at scarredforlifepodcast@gmail.com. Or you can reach out to us on social media. I am at MB McAndrews on both Twitter and Blue Sky. I am more on Blue Sky recently. And I'm also at MB.McAndrews on Instagram.
And I'm at Gaily Dreadful everywhere, but I also, while I have a presence on Twitter, I have deleted it from my phone. If you want to reach out to me, Blue Sky is probably the best way.
And of course, you can follow the podcast on Twitter and Blue Sky at Scarred Podcast, and then on Instagram at Scarred for Life Podcast.
And please don't forget to review, rate, and subscribe. And if you want to help support us, we do have a Patreon.
Thank you to Eric Power for artwork. Thank you to Sean Keller for our music. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Please stay safe out there, but most importantly, stay creepy.
And until next time.